Hey everybody, welcome to a very special episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die, and very special in that we have Joe. We brought him out of the zoo crew and onto the main feed. Joe from Lions Led by Donkeys, because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Afghanistan has kind of collapsed a touch. We got Joe, we got Nate, and we got me. So I guess I'll start. I was in Afghanistan in 2004 as public affairs, spent a lot of time on Bagram, spent a lot of time in Jalalabad and Asadabad, and traveling up and down the northwestern, the border towns and stuff, because that's where we had provincial reconstruction teams, which were this great idea of civil affairs guys saying, oh, you guys need a school built here, you need a well built here. They would assess it. They would go. They would find local contractors to do the building, and then it would get built. Of course, that's in theory. That as you spell it out, it sounds great. Obviously, not perfect, and a lot of graft involved in it. But that was 2004 for me. So this 20-year war that we got. Nate, when were you there?
I was there from 2009 until 2010, basically. I deployed in February 2009 and got back in March of 10.
And you were there for surge years, right?
I was there at the beginning of the surge, basically. By the time that I left, all of the elements of the surge had rotated into country. So basically, we started it, and the footprint started expanding outward, but they were also bringing in lots more troops. And then by the time that I was on my way out, I think the high watermark of troop presence in Afghanistan had been reached. And some of the big operations in places like Marja that the Marines were doing in southern Afghanistan were starting around that time. But I was sort of there for the tail end of what had been like the pre-surge footprint, and then scaled up, massively, and watched that happen. And I was an infantry officer, so I was part of a light infantry airborne brigade, and my battalion occupied the western half of Paktika province, which, if you're not super familiar with Afghan geography, is a border province in the southeastern part of the country. If you want to look on a map and locate Ghazni on the ring road, and then basically it's about 30 or 40 miles, maybe a little further, southeast of Ghazni is a town called Sharana, which was the capital of Paktika province, and that is where my battalion's headquarters were located. Fob Sharana fell to the Taliban a couple of days ago, before Kabul did. So yeah, that was the province that I was in, and then I never went back. I got out of the army 4 years later, and I followed stuff back and forth. But at one point, because I was planning on, I was in the Green Beret program, and I was planning on doing that, I went to the language school at Fort Bragg as part of the Special Forces course to learn Pashto. So I learned Pashto for 6 months. At one point, I tested 2-2 in Pashto. I don't really speak it anymore, but I understand a little bit, and can do basic phrases and stuff. So I have been following the news, but I stopped really trying to be in the weeds of it, because I guess I just sort of lost belief that there was anything was going to change. And that's a very long summary of my thing. But yeah, I was at one point sort of I want to do AFPAC hands. I want to be a Green Beret. I want to work in this region for the rest of my life. I was really into it, but I don't know. A lot of stuff that I saw happen just really disabused me of any optimism about the Afghan government. And so none of this really came as a surprise to me. Now I realize, Joe, you need to tell where you were and when you were there. But yeah, that's my take.
I was there twice. My first time was in May to May from 9 to 10. So I was right after Nate. But my first time I was up in Kapisa, Parwan, Bamyan, as mentor trainer for the Afghan National Police, mostly doing patrols and stuff with them. I was lower enlisted, so I wasn't handling any of the actual training, mostly just going on patrols with the ANP, which are functionally no different from the Army.
I had no idea. Everybody always oh, they're not ANA, they're ANP. It's they're still dudes that aren't getting paid on time. What is? Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't matter to them.
Green uniforms versus blue uniforms, basically.
Right.
Again, I was there in 2004, so this is I'm pre all.
You probably
of this.
had the Afghan militia forces. There were always these different acronyms of new groups that had been stood up. When I was there, the Afghan Civil Order Police became a thing, and I remember going on missions with ANCOP, who are part of the ANP but are different than ANP. It was wild.
Yep. That was my second tour.
Oh yeah, but you'll say your second tour you were in Kandahar province or Helmand province, weren't you?
I was in Kandahar, yeah. And like functionally no different as far as my job went. I went from training A&P to ANCOP and ANA.
Mm-hmm.
And the ANCOP, for lack of a better term, are like commandos for the cops.
Yep.
Specifically within urban areas, which is ironic because I was not in Kandahar city for the most part. Which is fine because I was also a tank crewman and I was not in a tank. So I guess we could bond over that.
I also trained. I ran a provincial coordination center, which I don't know if you have one in Kandahar, but a lot of provinces stood up these things where they put like an American contingent located at the provincial headquarters just to be like an information clearinghouse for ANA, all ANSF, so ANA, ANP, ABP, NDS. So I ran that. I started out as a headquarters company XO when I got deployed, and then I worked as a side job, basically got tasked to do a bunch of logistics and coordination for the election, and my battalion commander was pretty happy with how I did. And then also the guy who was supposed to take over the OCCP stepped on an IED and got obliterated, so they were like, well, we got to fill this spot, so they put me in it.
Yeah, that was a little bit above me.
The Starship Troopers method of getting promoted.
That's kind of how I got my first team lead. But like, we had the provincial headquarters, which is actually what I did in Kapisa. But the provincial headquarters in that province is like the size of a garage.
Yeah.
So like, in Kandahar, the provincial headquarters is quite a bit different. And it was around the same time that we were it was like the take and hold thing. Mm-hmm. Where we would embed and the quote unquote put an Afghan face on patrols, so the ANCOP would lead patrols. But that I lived at ANCOP police stations, and this is a good place to plug my book, The Hooligans of Kandahar, I guess. But
yeah, if you want an idea of why the U.S. lost in Afghanistan, read that book. Not to say, Joe, goddamn
it, I did it personally.
Why did you not win this war yourself? But also, like you really get the feel that nobody knows what they're doing.
But I think the time that I truly lost hope in our mission was like, I mean, by the time I deployed the first time, I'd been in the Army a few years. Like I didn't deploy straight out of basic or anything like that. But the second deployment for sure, because while working with the ANCOP, we captured the third most wanted man in Kandahar, and it changed absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, so we've just been doing this for like 15 years. Like it's nothing. Like you get. I mean, the ANCOP sustained significantly worse casualties than we did, but like we can do this all day, every day, and it doesn't actually do anything. But like I've obviously, as I've been in the news a few times and wrote a fucking book. I've stayed in the weeds, but it's mostly not out of hope for the mission as much as it is like I'm. As a dark side, it's like I'm witnessing history that I also took part in, right? Like, because I'm kind of a historian. I'm in grad school studying stuff like this, so like very, very few times are we going to get something quite like this. So I've been paying close attention to it, also because I'm invested in ANCOP, ANA, and AMP soldiers. I know them. I'm fucking Facebook friends with some of them.
Yeah, same.
So like, I've been desperately worried about them, and they're safe. And as far as I know, most of them are safe, as anybody who's been watching the news knows. But that's also why, as I'm sure we're about to get into, some of the discourse around this has been infuriating.
Now, so it really, so we're recording this on the 17th of August. I believe Kabul was taken 14th, 15th or so. So
I believe it was Sunday the 15th was when they announced it. Yeah.
So we're a good 48 hours past. So this is when, like, the first 24 hours is when all the really stupid takes come out, and then the 48 hours is when the really stupid but long form takes come out. When you start getting like the Radio Free Tom writing his how Afghanistan losing is our fault, like the American people. So there is a lot of takes that are floating around, and I don't want to. We're not going to get bogged down in Twitter minutia here, because Twitter is its own thing. Because we're going to be talking about things you can see outside of Twitter. You're just seeing it on Twitter because that's where you can't stop reading, doom scrolling. So I get it, but I think one of the biggest ones is we're just talking about the ANA the Afghan National Police, the ANCOPs, the Afghan militia, the fucking dudes that were being run by warlords when I was there, because there were still warlords in a few provinces. There were still, as we called it, blue on blue, where the warlords are like, the Americans ain't gonna fuck with us, and I'm gonna drive my tanks over there to shoot at your tanks for a little bit. It happened all the time. So, but there's a lot of discussion around what the ANA, the ANP should be doing in this kind of time. And I don't have a lot of background in what the Taliban has been doing for the last 10 years or so to kind of spruce themselves up to be able to do what they did, because they really just kind of walked in everywhere and said, we're in charge. And it felt like everybody was like, yeah, that's fine. We don't have another, I mean, not as a, yay, Taliban, but like, what the fuck are we going to do about it? There's nothing we can do about this.
I mean, I'll throw a couple of things. So to start out with, I think that something that I would really like to do is to kind of talk about, my perceptions of what the situation was like for regular Afghans, and, center the fact, and Joe, you've done a really good job highlighting this in the past as well, that, they've suffered immense casualties. The Afghan military has, I think suffered something along the lines of like nearly 70,000 people killed since 2001. And, a lot of that's been happening recently. There were immense casualties. I remember immense casualties on the ANSF side during the election of 2009, for example. And I think that starting so-called post-surge, as our footprint diminished, but even during the time that we had this expanded footprint, there was never a time when the government and coalition forces controlled the entirety of the country. I can give you some examples of some districts on the eastern side of Ghazni, east of Highway 1, towards basically the more or less border between Paktika and Ghazni provinces, is a kind of mountainous area. It's not big. It's literally just like, we'll call it like one row of mountains, but it's sort of like there's this very dry floodplain, and some mountains, and that sort of forms the barrier. And the highway runs through this floodplain. East of the highway, you have districts like Makor and Abband, and there's a bunch of others. I've forgotten most of them, but like those places didn't have district centers. They'd been burned down, and they had district sub-governors from the Taliban, but the Afghan police, Afghan military did not have bases out there. They didn't really patrol out there. If they did, they'd get attacked. Certainly, if we went out, we'd get attacked. And so as such, even at the height of the surge, there never was a permanent presence. They did not have control over those areas. What the U.S. did have, though, was air superiority. I mean, the Taliban have no air assets to speak of. They might now. I mean, apparently they've captured, rotary wing and some fixed wing aircraft, but they had no air assets to speak of. So we had the ability to disrupt them, but we just simply didn't have enough stuff going on if we even wanted to, if we even had the will, to do full on fucking occupation. Like there was never a time when you could say, all right, the Afghan government controls the whole of this country. That is not the case. And then furthermore, one of the big conundrums in the war was that the Taliban had safe haven in Pakistan. The border between the tribal areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan is pretty porous. There is an organization called Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan that is like the Pakistani Taliban that are directly funded and assisted by the Pakistani Inter Services Intelligence, or ISI, but also the Afghan Taliban similarly, coordinate with them, receive weapons from them, things along those lines. And this was something that people knew from the beginning, that the Haqqani network, for example, the people that the sort of the Taliban were never one big organization when we were fighting them post 2001. It seems they have coalesced into something, and they have a governing council. But like where we were, it wasn't like this was the remnants of Mullah Omar's people. It was they were anti Karzai, anti what we call Jaroa, the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Forces that they were left over from the Mujahideen era. These guys were fighters who fought the Russians and then fought each other. And so in our case, we were fighting against Jalaluddin Haqqani, and then he died, and his son Sirajuddin took over. But in other places, you had other warlords or other ex-mujahids or the, Mullah Omar, Kandahar, Taliban, the Kandahar, I think they call them the Quetta Shura, those guys in the South. And then, Joe, you probably encounter those guys more.
Yeah, we are well acquainted.
Yeah. And we like when I saw that Sirajuddin Haqqani is on like the senior council, I was like, oh fuck, because like those guys,
right.
Yeah, that's who held Bo Bergdahl. That's who like it was well known that like they had those guys, like they had their base in Miramshah in North Waziristan, and it wasn't like you could we were going to do anything. Like they did drone strikes, but like on a long enough timeline, they figured out how to avoid the drone strikes. So like they could basically operate unimpeded. The drone strikes were like killing what the military would call targets of opportunity, but mostly were just killing random people they thought were involved, and oftentimes killing way more civilians. So like we never controlled the country, and we never controlled we certainly never were able to squeeze where they were training and equipping and basing and had all their logistics and intel and stuff in Pakistan as well. So you effectively had a war where the enemy had the option of going to Afghanistan to conduct operations when they wanted to, which was typically in the warmer months, and then retreating back to Pakistan, to the tribal areas, to refit, retrain, et cetera, recruit, et cetera. And so, like, we didn't really, like, there was no real control, and the government, in my experience, they slapped a lot of uniforms on and branding on things, but it was mostly just like, all right, which people are loyal to Karzai's tribe, or like the tribal elders in this area, and which guy can bring 100 fighters from his village or his district. Okay, he's a police chief now. Like, it was the fact that they wore uniforms gave it this notion of like sort of echelonment and regimentation, but that wasn't really my experience. Certainly not with the ANP, but also not with the ANA, really. And
we gave uniforms. I mean, as I said, the warlords. We gave uniforms to the warlords and said, "Hey, if you stop shooting at each other, we'll make you a colonel in the Afghan National Army." And like, I think there's the biggest disconnect, and I hate this, that in 20 years, it's like people don't understand. Americans don't understand. It's like shit's different there. Like you don't. It's not organized in the way that you think that this is. You don't just say, "Hey, you're a colonel now," and then you're just like, "Yes, I'm a colonel. Please send me, assign me to, Fort Bragg, or send me to the," like, you're still there. You're still probably incredibly racist towards whoever's in the province next to you, and you're not really under a watchful eye, man. You're just you get to do whatever you want as long as you don't break the rules that the Americans set down. You can pretty much do whatever. So it's a very like when we say these things, when we say like you made them a colonel, gave them a uniform, it doesn't work the way that it works here in America. So and I want to specifically say that for our civilian listeners who may only have like a medium grasp on how the military works here, it works completely different in Afghanistan, and really in any country.
And more than that, there was a lot of problems because that is certainly how it started. Like, our favorite warlords will be made generals, colonels, which is why, and this is true, the ANA had more officers in it than the U.S. Army.
Yes.
So like, and it had like over 1,000 generals, right? Like,
yes.
we wanted to throw rank at people to make them loyal. However, that slowly began to go away as we sent Afghans to West Point, we sent Afghans to Sandhurst, we sent Afghans to all these places. So they get back to the system that they were going to be working, because it's not like they're going to get stationed at Fort Hood or whatever. And they realize that like there's nowhere to go. Like the old power structures still dominate everything above them. So you have these new younger officers from the new generation who are being smashed down and told what to do by this guy who honestly may or may not know how to read or write. And below them, you do have a very diverse group of, in some cases, 16-year-old kids, because there's not a lot of great record keeping there, who enlisted in the Afghan army, maybe for a job, but also because they actually believe in the government, and probably, just like in our case, mix of the two.
Right. Well, turns out, hey, I'm from a shitty place in the middle of nowhere, and I want to make a little extra money. The
Exactly.
army is attractive in a lot of ways.
And it was and not to mention, a lot of these outlying villages never had functioning schools, and the Afghan military had a very, very effective literacy program that you had to graduate from in order to graduate basic training. So their basic training is also quite extended. I think that's of like 2012 they made that mandatory. But and one of the problems came was this makeup was most of the army's Pashto, as people hopefully have been paying attention. So was the Taliban.
See, that was not my experience. Most of the army guys that I worked with where I was were all Tajik, but I also think that maybe there was some effort to put people from areas they weren't from,
yes,
and deploy them. So it's possible that because I would say the overwhelming majority of the police and army that I encountered in Paktika were Tajik, some Uzbek, a few Pashtun, but in most cases the enlisted ANP troops were not only not Pashtun, but did not speak Pashto at all.
Yeah, they did move different Kandaks and stuff around to areas they didn't have familial connections with because obvious reasons.
Yeah,
they did have problems like integrating certain units and stuff like that because some places are pretty goddamn racist.
Yeah.
Not to mention the Pashtuns have dominated Afghanistan for 3 centuries.
Yes.
And so you end up having all of these military commanders who have deep, deep local ties, even though they've been moved around because that's how they got the rank.
Yeah. I mean, speaking to one of my interpreters recently about this, and one of the points that he made was that Hamid Karzai and Ashraf Ghani and Mullah Baradar are all Populzai Pashtuns from southern Afghanistan. Like, these guys are all the same tribe, and like obviously there's some links and dialogue that goes on because they're from the same tribe, but also like you can imagine that if you're Tajik or Uzbek or Turkmen or, Nuristani or Hazara, God's sakes, or, if there's very few Sikhs left in Afghanistan, but if you are, like, that doesn't really necessarily give you a lot of confidence that the government is dominated by the same people that dominate the Taliban.
Right. And I mean, that's one of the problems that started the Taliban in the first place was the Mujahideen government was mostly Tajik and Uzbek. And they're like, yo, fuck those guys. And most of the southern warlords, to include Hekmat Yar and Dostum switching sides for the 12th time, eventually just made the government untenable, which led to the Taliban advance. But that is not the same, but is the same as what led to what we saw last week. But as far as like the military side of things and ANCOP and ANP is like we've talked about, these guys have absorbed some of the worst casualties in modern warfare over the last decade or so, because it wasn't the whole 20 years. It's mostly been about the last 10 years that they've been absorbing just gross casualties. And pile that on top of having no healthcare infrastructure. Most Afghan veterans, if they're wounded, they're effectively abandoned. After triage and emergency care, if they're going to survive. There's very little pension system. There's no benefits.
No.
Their benefit is their paycheck, which is then taken from them when they get wounded to the point they can no longer serve. Not to mention, they haven't been paid in like 4 months. And that's like conservative. That's unit by unit, because the Afghan military is ran much like how the U.S. military used to be run before direct deposit, which was the money is given to a pay officer, which in the Afghan military is often the commanding officer, and then he steals half of it.
Yes.
So there's a very good chance that depending on what unit you're in, you haven't been paid in longer than that. That the logistical system simply does not work. So you probably haven't gotten food or water, or if you had, you've probably stolen it from the local population or bought it with the paycheck that maybe you got. They don't have fucking ammo. Like there's video evidence of commandos, the best trained Afghan soldiers with anybody who doubts their fucking motivation can seriously just fuck off. Because they know if they get captured, they will be executed.
Yeah, I mean, there was a video not that long ago of commandos being forced to surrender when they ran out of ammo in a raid, and as soon as they were clear of the building, the Taliban killed all of them on camera.
It's about a platoon's worth.
Just gunned them all down on the spot.
They ran out of ammo because they could not get resupply because the Ministry of Defense simply does not work. They couldn't get air evac because the Ministry of Defense does not work. And I mean, that goes into, everybody I've seen, especially like main news pundits and shit, has been shitting over common Afghan soldiers for not defending their country. It's like, would you at this point, like you just watched your president get on a helicopter and run to, was it Uzbekistan or Tajikistan, everybody's running. Nobody's paying you. Nobody's giving you fucking bullets to fight with. What are you going to fight with?
Every American pundit with that kind of mentality and just animosity towards the local military, as if like a war hasn't been going on there for 20 years.
For 40 years.
Yeah, I mean,
like let's be honest, because in between the Soviets leaving and us showing up, there were 2 separate civil wars inside of Afghanistan as well. This is a very violent place.
Well, I wouldn't say even go so far as to say that it's a violent place, like as if to suggest that was by its nature, but rather that like the country's been destabilized since 1974. You know, there was, when the king was deposed, there was a communist revolution, and you know, between outside money being dumped in to support people who oppose the regime and the regime's incompetence and brutality, you basically by the end of 1974, you had a rural insurgency that a lot of the crackdowns from the communist government under Tarakay and under Amin and then later under Karmal after the Soviets invaded were responses to what was happening in the countryside. So effectively, since 1974, the country has been destabilized. I mean, the American ambassador to Afghanistan was assassinated in 1977, I believe. 77, yeah. In Kabul. Yeah. His name was Adolf Dubs. He was murdered in Kabul. You know, the Soviets had numerous instances of all their advisors being massacred and their families being massacred in places like Ghazni or Gardez.
I think Mazar-i-Sharif as well.
Places like that. And we're talking like 500 people total, you know, like women, children, Soviet advisors who were living there, advising both military and civilian advisors. So, I mean, like, the country was already destabilized before the Soviet invasion. And then obviously when the Soviets left in 1989, the Mujahideen turned on each other. You have the whole story that, you know, Kabul, when people first arrived in Kabul post 2001, they were really stunned at the level of destruction. And the thing is, that destruction wasn't because of the Soviet Union. The cities were secured and safe by and large during the Soviet occupation. The Kabul was destroyed when Gulbuddin Hekmatyar just fired all his rockets into it one day in 1993 or 94, I think.
It's because he was promised a dictatorial regime by Pakistan.
Yeah, and you know, like the people like you may have seen videos of the Taliban having seized Abdurrashid Dostum's house in Jowzjan province or outside of Mazar-i-Sharif. And, you know, I noticed, like I said, my Pashto's not super great anymore, but one of the fighters was walking around his just insanely gaudy, ornate living room, you know, with just every luxurious bauble you could think of and a huge TV. And the guy just kept saying, khanzira, 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 which is like, oh, you fucking pig, you pig. Because, like, you know, these are people who live, these fighters by and large are from rural areas or like not big urban areas. They aren't from families that can afford to send them to school. And so, like, you know, the life that they have lived has been incredibly austere. And to see, like, this is a guy who worked for the government, he's living in this kind of opulence. But then also, like, Dostum, one of those people that we allowed the Afghan government to sort of enshrine into its system, was
the only marshal of the republic.
Yeah,
actually.
He, you know, his claim to fame is being a like the sort of big heavy among the Uzbeks. But, like, the man is well known as like a sexual sadist and a war criminal. I mean, even in the crowded field of war criminals, you know, with regard to how the Mujahideen behaved, he stands out. I mean, like, he is personally the guy who gave the orders for the massacre at Dashti Leli. Like, when Mike Spann died at Shurbagan prison, the whole story with in 2001, when they found John Walker Lind and they packed, you know, way too many Taliban prisoners into the prison in Shurbagan, and then it turned into a prison riot, and Spann died, and a bunch of Americans got wounded and almost killed when they basically had to JDAM their own position. The response was Dostum's guys showed up and rolled up all the prisoners and packed them into shipping containers at like crushing suffocation levels, and then shot them full of holes. And when they got to where Dashti Leli is, basically most of them, if not all of them, were dead, and they just buried them out in the desert. And this is in 2001, and like in the convoy full of these blood dripping containers full of dead people who were prisoners that they had an obligation to protect, you know, were American Special Forces guys from 10th Special Forces Group. So, like,
I think the amount of slaughter was around 1,000 to 1,500 people.
Yeah. I remember it was 2,000 people. I think they packed into containers, and most of them did not survive. And the fact of the matter is, like, this is stuff that happened. You know, this guy, like you said, Marshal of the Republic. Like, similarly, they gave
former vice president, minister of defense.
They gave a ceremonial position to Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who also, like, you know, when he was a religious conservative college student at Kabul University, was represented among a faction of guys who basically threw acid in the face of female students. Like, these guys, like, you got to realize that. I'm not saying this to be like, oh, like, marvel at the horror of Afghanistan. What I'm trying to say is that, like, these are the people that the government brought in. Like, the government, the Afghan government post 2001 was in many ways just like stamping the imprimatur of a notionally liberal state on a Mujahideen government that was just there to grift, that was just there to extort. And those guys are fine, but the soldiers and the functionaries that served that government were treated horribly, and even worse treated were the civilians that they governed. And, like, the levels of corruption they experienced, these people had to suffer through, you know, reach unimaginable levels. And so, like you said, Joe, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, like, when people are like, oh, why did they just turn and run? It's like, man, you're basically saying, why didn't you die to my satisfaction? Why aren't you dying in place with no possible chance of survival against an enemy that's been negotiating with your commanders for a while, saying, like, we won't kill you if you surrender, so that I can feel good in America, a country I refuse to let any of you come to? And that, to me, like that just disgusts me. Exactly. It's just so fucking craven. It's so contemptuous. And it relies on this fucking fantasy baby talk conception of what war is like, what Afghanistan's like, what being a human being is like, so that people can kind of fucking nail it into these, I don't know, like, they can make it into fucking Playmobil figurines so they can understand it.
Yeah. I mean, like, the thing is like, and I understand that I kind of give, like, over on my show, I try to do like a soldier's military history, right? Like, because by and large, the monsters of history, the Dostums, for example, like, actually lost a job once working for a journalist adjacent, I guess, website, because I fucking hated Dostum, and I wrote that he was a horrible war criminal and a sex pest. Like, the man was exiled while vice president. He could not come back to the country. But, like, you know, these soldiers who were given very, very little, or most of the time nothing, were left out to die by their commanders. Sometimes, other times, their commanders realized that the situation was fucking hopeless, and they did what they could to save their soldiers' lives. And that is incredible, honestly. Like, because if we listen to half of these guys who, wax philosophic from their fucking shitty desks somewhere that will never be threatened with danger, they should have all just sat there and died for a government that already functionally no longer existed, right? Like, the Kandahar commanders or whatever, who realized that, yes, I could stand and fight until in Kandahar or Mazar Sharif or wherever, fucking name a city, doesn't matter. But in the end, nothing's going to change. My government's already left me. People are running for the borders. I haven't heard anything from my, like, command structure from the radio in days. Like, saving your soldiers via surrendering is legitimately the best thing you can do. Like, militarily, it's the best thing you can do. Like, even getting away from, like, the morals and ethics of warfare. Standing and doing, like, a last stand on, Subdistrict 6's fucking provincial headquarters does nothing for anybody.
No.
Well, these are the same people who think, like, General Custer had a noble death.
Right.
It's like, no, he died like an asshole. Like the asshole.
I just find it very
was.
funny when, for example, you get something like an Eric Erickson style guy who, like, literally gets on Twitter to complain and cry about being forced by slow Uber response times to have to walk 3/4 of a mile from, like, fucking Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville back to his, like, disgusting, McMansion in suburban Atlanta. And then he's like, why do these cowards not fight for their country? It's just like, Bro, you could fucking die now and no one would notice or care. Like, I don't give a shit about you. Like, it's just...
You have like teenage Afghan soldiers who haven't been paid in fucking however long, who probably don't even have boots, humping like the same amount of gear that I did into an outpost that is not protected by air cover at all.
And no Casovac, no medevac, basically no medical attention. You know,
very little.
Like you said,
very, very little.
Almost no food. I mean, I can give you some examples. We had to do an emergency Casovac from an outpost of A&P because they tried to stay warm on a really cold night by lighting a fire inside a shipping container, and they all got carbon monoxide poisoning. And I know there was like 9 guys who were basically unresponsive, but there were a bunch more who had it. And like, I tell that, you know, to give you an example of the level of like privation and exposure they had. And I would point this out, and then I'm going to stop talking. Do you guys remember when the Battle of Wenat happened in 2008?
Yes.
Joe, you remember. Francis, do you remember this?
No, I was drunk.
Wenat was when.
I came back from Afghanistan and was pretty drunk up until I went to Iraq in 2009. So
fair enough.
Yeah. Listen, all right. So the thing, what you got to understand is, Wenat was a small town, village in I think it's in the Waigal Valley in Nuristan, and a unit from the 173rd Airborne Brigade that were like in the process of ripping out, like they were so close to going home that like they had already met their counterparts, got tasked to go set up a COP, and they basically got ruled out there to set up in this village, and they had some buildings, but primarily their positions were vehicles and some HESCOs they filled by hand and sea wire. So for the people who don't know what I'm saying, I mean like like wire and cloth baskets they filled themselves with their own entrenching tools to make like bastions that would stop bullets and explosions. Concertina wire, like razor wire, and then their vehicles with the mounted guns on top. So it's incredibly exposed. They got in a huge tick with your classic firing at dawn. Taliban have surrounded you with hundreds of fighters. 8 Americans died, to include the platoon leader. It was, as I understand it, it was one of the, if not the biggest like mass casualty in terms of KIA events in the war in Afghanistan. There might have been more at the time. It was
for America.
Yeah, for America. I should specify for America. There might have been a few more. At the time, it was more have happened since. Obviously, with Afghans, there have been way more. There was a CH-47 Chinook that got shot down full of SEALs, where I think like there was a significant, perhaps more than that died. But up until that point, that was the most significant one. And the reason I bring that up is that like that prompted in 2008, 2009 so much soul searching and tactical shit, and like lots and lots of like what the fuck happened.
They even opened like an investigation into M4s.
Yeah, like. That's
no expense was paid.
That's not enough. That's not enough KIA to even warrant a fucking story in Afghan local news in terms of like ANA or ANSF casualties. That's what they were experiencing. It's like they were experiencing worse than the U.S. Army in Vietnam levels of casualties, with no medevac and basically no aftercare. And
no fire support,
no resupply, basically no food, no pay or limited pay or like filched pay from their commanders. And people are like, why don't these guys stay and fight? It's like, listen, man, I am not going to ask any human being to do something that I wouldn't do, and I wouldn't fucking put up with that. And I certainly, if I was told you can put your guns down and not die and just live your life, I would fucking walk.
Yeah, and here's the thing that like infuriates me is like, obviously, like Afghanistan will be in my brain until I die.
Yes.
Whatever's left of my brain. I never want to take away anybody's feelings of what they're dealing with, of like losing friends or family or whatever. Just imagine this. After 20 years of war, the U.S. lost almost 3,000
killed. Like 2,500, yeah.
Yeah. The Afghan National Army was dealing with that, more than that, almost 2 times that every single year.
Yeah.
We would have broken down. The U.S. Army would cease to function in its current form if we took 66,000 dead or something during within half that time frame. Nobody would enlist.
Afghanistan was easy to ignore when you've got like when you have more training accidents, you have more suicides than you do casualties of war. Like people probably killed themselves more than they were killed by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And that is
something we share with the Soviet Army, actually.
Yeah.
One thing that breaches us across capitalism, communism, that's being a soldier fucking sucks. And that's one of the things that's constantly pisses me off is, and I correct me if I'm wrong, please. It's racism, because we all lost somebody for the most part close to us in combat.
Yes.
I'll never forget I'll never forget their face. I'll never forget their name. And that's like 2 guys.
I had 7 guys from my battalion die. 2 of them were close friends.
Yeah. Afghans went through that weekly.
Yeah.
They and most of them are related in some form or another.
Yeah.
Of course they fucking stopped fighting.
Yeah.
Like you inhuman fucking bastards. Like, what do you expect them to do?
The average age of an Afghan is 18 years old, man. Like, it's, I'm with you guys on I really want to stop shooting and being fucking shot at. And if you can get a reprieve somewhere.
And the thing that I would say is that, like, I think that this attitude, the ones that we're expressing here, are, well, I'm not going to go so far as to say that they're really common amongst Americans. I think they are more common with people the more they spent time with Afghan people and Afghan military. I mean, obviously there's some people who reacted really negatively and basically just hate all of them. I can recall my old commander who had been in Iraq during the lead up to the surge, the sort of civil war period prior to the surge. And he had spoken to a friend of his who he'd gone to the career course with, who had deployed to Afghanistan with 10th Mountain in 05-06. And his brigade had put together like a AAR book of all the company commanders and some platoon leaders talking about, like, they created like a form letter rubric of, like, lessons learned, do this, don't do that, stuff we learned, etc., and let these guys fill it in, and they made a book for it. And I remember he had this, and he's like, yeah, I took a read. And, like, I can't begin to describe how contemptuous all of it was of Afghans and Afghan culture, but I primarily focus on one guy who basically, in his comments in the formal AAR book, said, ultimately, there's no point to any kind of cultural understanding with these people. All they want to do is, basically, he said, all they want to do is sleep, smoke hash, and have homosexual relations with each other. And I was probably like, you're a company commander. You were in charge of 120 odd troops in Afghanistan, and, like, you were directing operations, for a similar, if not larger, number of Afghan troops. And that's how you feel about them. Like, that contempt is everywhere, and it drives me nuts. But I feel like there are more people who approach it from this perspective of seeing the humanity and the utter exhaustion, if they were there and if they, empathized at all with those people. And I guess the thing for me is that at present, COVID has gone pretty uncontrolled in Afghanistan. There's a famine, in the sense that there's like over 1 million people are at risk of serious medical malnutrition. There's been a significant drought. It's a country that basically depends on rainwater for agriculture. It's incredibly exposed to climate change, and people are just fucking exhausted. People
it's covered in unexploded ordnance that kill more Afghans every year than more Americans ever died there.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just part of their life is like, oh, my kid got blown up in the field.
Your kids, and they're getting blown up by stuff that's left over from the Soviet War or the Mujahideen War or us. So as I understand it, we didn't particularly set minefields, but, like, there's still UXO from us, and there's certainly UXO from things that were set up by insurgents to target us. And and so, to me, like, I just see that utter exhaustion and the complete dysfunction of the government and the military. And I cannot, I understand this romantic notion of going down with a ship and dying for your cause. But, like, you know what? Like, who goes down with the ship? Officers. Do you know what primarily, from what I've heard, a lot of the senior officers in Afghanistan did? Leave the country. So, like, don't look at these guys, these young kids, and they're all young, who have no leadership, who have no munition, who have no resources, no ability to fight, no real way of doing anything besides using an engagement to commit suicide. Do not dare fucking look at them and say, well, why didn't you stand and fight? Like, because you wouldn't either. You fucking wouldn't either.
I will say that with all the takes that have been coming, especially from troops who went overseas, most of the soldiers, like left or right or center, thankfully don't put the onus on what's wrong with why didn't the Afghan army do better. Because look, did they show up stoned a lot? Yes. Did they fight stoned a lot? Yes. Did they show up without boots sometimes? Also yes. But they fucking showed up.
Yeah.
They showed up and they tried to and they said, what's the mission? What are we doing? Let's go ahead and get it taken care of. And you know what? Maybe there was some back and forth. Maybe one time, and this was in Iraq, not in Afghanistan, but maybe one time the dude said, hey, we're not going to go on this convoy with you. And we couldn't do any convoys without Iraqi army with us unless you fuel up our vehicles and give us lunch. And it's like, all right, and you know what? Hey, if that's all it took to get the Afghan National Army guys to come out and start shooting in the right direction, then
also like
fine.
no one dare fucking be like, oh, the Afghan troops use drugs. Have you met fucking American soldiers?
You know where we got our
so
drugs from?
Pictures.
Like we were buds over that, man. Like, and like the thing is I've been in a fair amount of combat, not nearly as much as like the average 19-year-old Afghan soldier. And the thing that made me not be hopeless is that I knew someone was coming for me. I knew that something would be flying through the air to save me. I know another convoy of trucks would be rushing down the road to pull my ass out of the fire. I knew if I got on the radio, I could get a bigger gun to come save me, right?
Yes.
Afghans didn't have that.
No.
At no point did they have. When we were there, they had that. We would rush out and help them. We did all the time. But then we left. They knew that their government wasn't going to fucking help them. They knew that they weren't going to get any accurate fire support. If their rotary wing is working or if their fixed wing is working, it might get there, but it probably won't. So like, shut the fuck up.
So I want to ask, since we're kind of coming up on an hour here, but I do want to ask, I'm going to kind of get your guys' opinion on, we left Afghanistan July 1st. Like that's when the big pull out of Bagram happened and all the ANA guys went in and started basically looting everything out of the Bagram air base up to the 15th. So we've got, 45-ish days until Kabul falls. We have all talked about the dire need to get the fuck out of Afghanistan. And now that we are out of Afghanistan, like I want to address this because I'm sure that there's going to be people hands on hip. Well, you said that we should leave. And I don't. And the thing is, I don't think that there was ever a way that the Taliban didn't take back over. And I want to hear your guys' opinions on that too. I was just hoping that we would be able to get more of the people that helped us out. We would be able to destroy all the biometric stuff that we have of like half the population of Afghanistan that's been gathered over 20 years, because that's all falling into the hands of the Taliban at this point. I mean, a database of here's people who the Americans have worked with. So it is definitely we should have gotten out, but there also should have been a let's speed some visas through, or fuck a visa. I know you worked with us. Get on the fucking plane and we'll deal with it later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the truth is that our politicians are cowards and that they like to make sympathetic noises about our Afghan allies without having to make policy that would allow for, the wholesale suspension of the normal bullshit 20 years fucking visa bullshit that happens. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but the truth is that we make it as onerous as possible and then be like, oh, it's the system. You got to go through the system. And in this case, what they needed to be doing was expediting it to the point where like they just got people on planes to some place they could then do the processing and got them settled. And they didn't do that. And now you're in the situation where, you really have your thumb up your ass and people are suffering. And you have people literally hanging on the plane and dying, falling off of it. Like, I just wish that it had not come to this in the sense of leaving that many people hanging. I am helping process stuff to people who are trying to organize things and just like being the person to sort stuff to like, when someone reaches out, try and, get the information collated in the way it would need to be able to like inquire with SIV or P2 visa stuff. And yesterday I went through and did applications, processing paperwork to do a submission thing for, a charter flight, hopefully, if they can get it organized. And I'm, put up my own money as collateral as well, as lots of people are doing this. And I processed the passport pages and personal information of a family of 9 of an interpreter who's worked for the coalition since 2007, but has been fucked out of his visa, his wife, and their 7 children who are all under 12. That's who could potentially get left behind and fucking smoked for what they did. That's 7 orphans and a widow if they even let his wife stay alive. And like, that is one of so many cases. Those kids didn't do anything wrong. That guy received promises from every fucking dickhead in uniform like you or me saying, we've got you, you helped us, and they've left him behind. And that, I don't have words for it. It's a fucking abomination. And they should have, they need to fix it now because they still can, but like, there's no excuse for them to have just tried to slow walk it, be like, oh, well, how's it going to play in the midterms if we bring Afghans over? Like, and you fucking know that's what they were doing. So that's just.
I mean, it's and the right has already grabbed onto that. Like, yes. the dirty Afghans coming to your, which is insane because like, why would you hate people who are very religiously conservative?
It doesn't make sense, Francis. They doesn't fucking matter. They don't care. They know they're hypocrites. They don't fucking care. They're just fucking assholes.
It's absolute. They're asshole racists, and even though they have a lot in common, like they'd have a lot in common with fucking Taliban. They don't give a shit.
There are more than one person that I've seen. Well, my favorite one was how the Afghan fighters have these slim noble faces because they haven't been eating a bunch of GMO foods. I'm like, that's called malnutrition.
Well,
that's what we call that.
The thing, I think I've said this before. And that is like every failure that we're having right now that we're seeing plastered on the news, that people are literally dying trying to get on these planes, it happened on purpose. And maybe it didn't happen. Maybe it wasn't planned. But so conservatively, we've had a year to plan our exit, our evacuation conservatively, since like Trump signed the paperwork or whatever. I would say we've had over a decade. And we have done everything we could to make the process of going from Afghanistan to the United States. I mean, I know other countries have made it somewhat easier, but we did this. It's on us. We've done everything possible to make the process of getting from Afghanistan to the United States harder, if not impossible, since of what, 2010, even before then, really?
I live in the United Kingdom, and they've deported 15,000 people to Afghanistan since 2005, being like, well, it's a safe country now. They were deporting them.
You see, exactly.
As of a month ago.
And I know parts of Western Europe are doing the same thing with Syrians. So like this, I'm going to try to stay on the U.S. because that's where I live. I haven't escaped yet. But like this is one, I'm glad that combat operations are over, but things aren't black and white. We abandoned the Afghan military and the Afghan government. We did not treat them as allies. We just fucking bounced, and we made that well known. So like we've created a humanitarian crisis that we are washing our hands of. Because the Taliban is the government. There is no Taliban anymore. It's just the Afghan government. There's no denying that. There's no debating that. It's theirs. So because we are ashamed and people don't want to process that, how could we have possibly lost this? We're not going to give any aid money to Afghanistan. I guarantee you we won't, because then we'll be giving money to what we consider terrorists and not the actual government, despite the fact there's no functional difference between them and Saudi Arabia. And, we're going to continue. And I'm not saying this because I like the fucking Taliban. I fucking hate the Taliban. I wish that they didn't win. But, our best interests or our best intentions or what we think doesn't fucking matter. They're a government in control of 30 odd million people that we have a duty to help. I don't care if whoever's in charge. They're going to be dealing with famine. They're dealing with uncontrolled, rampant virus spread through COVID-19 because the last Afghan government did nothing to do anything about it. I don't think any kind of vaccine shipments ever got there. Not to mention all of the various UXOs that are mostly left to like charities to try to pick up. And while I know a lot of them are from the Soviets, the Soviet Union doesn't fucking exist anymore. And also we just left. So some of that's on us too. Like there's there's nuance to this whole thing that I'm probably not getting across, but everything that's happening right now, the crisis that we've created at the airport that's killed 7 people at the time of recording, and maybe more, is 100% on us. And I don't give a fuck if you voted for Joe Biden. I don't give a fuck if you voted for Donald Trump. It doesn't matter. They all own this. Biden was president. Biden is president. He was vice president for 8 fucking years during this war. If anything, he owns it more than the last president. He's been in direct control of this for a very long time. So yeah, this is on us. And we need to look at this, and you need to stop with the fucking weepy bullshit that this isn't who America is. This is who America is. We did this. Like, if you Photoshop an American flag over the fucking airport right now, which is ironically named after Karzai, like that's the perfect postcard of dealing with us. We'll stay there for as long as we deem necessary, and then fuck off and leave you to die.
Yeah, as long as it works for us.
Yeah, and then we'll make a movie about how sad it makes us.
But countries keep coming back to us, but also I think that we just keep showing up. Like, it reminds me of the Kurds. Like, every time we fucked over the Kurds in the last, I don't know how many decades. And like, eventually the Kurds are going to say, y'all just need to stay away from us.
Well, I mean, the comes like you pick the poison pill when your back's against the wall and you're dealing with like the fascist dictatorship of Turkey or fucking Bashar al-Assad. Like, we don't seem so bad. But like,
we'll leave eventually.
What we're doing with the Kurds is what we did to the Kurds. What we're probably going to do worse to the Kurds later is immoral and fucking disgusting. But what we did to Afghanistan and to a lesser extent Iraq is like, I honestly I don't like to like find common ground with other generations of veterans. I really don't. Though my stepdad is an interesting character because he fought in Vietnam, then became a communist. But like, I was talking to him and he's like, no, this is exactly how we felt. Like, we knew the war was lost. Like, we knew we weren't going to win, but like, we also assumed we would do more for the people that we left behind. And like, that is saying that, and we did significantly more to like anybody who showed up to be evacuated in South Vietnam. Like, tens of thousands of more people we were able to evacuate.
Yeah, I think we got about 100,000 people out.
Yeah, and
it was right at. Which I think I saw somebody posted a clip of Biden back then talking against bringing over the South Vietnamese
fucking course
refugees.
He did. Fuck him.
Yeah. And this really is America. And like, I don't want anybody to blame themselves. I don't ever have a finger pointed at people in America for not paying enough attention or doing whatever. But you do have to understand that, like you said, Joe, this was preventable. This war wasn't winnable, because we're fighting an ideology, it's never the war against Afghanistan. It was the war in Afghanistan, which was the war on terror, which isn't about 8 or 9 different countries, depending on when the special forces units are flying in or out. But what we just saw, was preventable. It always comes down to the only thing that America can do is shoot you in the face. Anything else, we're just completely fucking useless at. We can secretly bomb countries. We can drop Agent Orange all over things as a defoliant. We can allow all kinds of war crimes. As long as it's a violent reaction and a violent response, America has got you fucking covered. But as soon as you say, cool, but I need medical attention now, or we need food, or we need any of these other things, you kind of get that's nice, guys, but I really got to go. And it's not as if like the America is going to come back and be like, well, we have our own people to take care of, because they don't give a fuck about you either.
No, of course
like
not.
Violence is the only answer when it comes to the American government. Like, violence against its own people, whether it be beating protesters who are saying you should stop beating us, whether it's just allowing people to starve when food waste is constant, whether it is direct or indirect violence, that is the only response that America has. So, and it's really like, it's not surprising, but it is disappointing, because you're just like, man, the one thing that we could have done, logistics, the paperwork, the shit we do that doesn't require shooting somebody in the face, and the shit that we're good at, man, we're good at bureaucracy in the military. We can run. I've seen stuff go through S1 fucking faster than shit through a goose, man. But if it's not directly benefiting the government, who gives a shit? Like in 15 days, 15 years, nobody's going to give a shit. And those people are still going to be dead. You know, the people who are going to die over the next month will still be dead. And that is just our legacy. And it's just very disappointing that, like, I knew it was a lie. I knew it was a loss. I knew that we weren't helping. I knew that everything was bad. And you're just like, maybe at the end we can do something halfway decent and just be like, we fucked up. I'm sorry. Everybody get on the boat to get the fuck out of here if you want. And we didn't do that. And we're not going to do that. And that is where that's where it sits for me. It's just like, even at the end, after 20 years, we still couldn't do the right thing. We did the easy thing, which was violence.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have much I can say beyond that. I think the thing that I would say to leave it on is that we talk about, you know, our experiences, but I think that at the present moment, there's a lot of people who are going to really want this to no longer be in the headlines and to not talk about it. And I think that the thing that needs to be given the most attention is that we are in a position to help a lot of people in terms of people who need to leave or want to leave, to agitate for refugee resettlement and for, you know, the stuff, especially for people who are at very serious risk of being persecuted. And that's not a thing that's going to get solved overnight, but that's also a thing that, you know, if pressure disappears after a week, like a lot of times these things do, then, you know, that's going to give that much more opportunity to our dogshit politicians, you know, in America, in the United Kingdom, in Europe, in Australia, to let the issue die because they're no longer feeling pressure. And what, you know, deep down, the only constituent opinion they care about is the racist vote, the racist boomer vote. And so I think that whether it's sort of like really, really time sensitive ongoing stuff, like things that are happening at this exact moment, or it's the longer term, you know, trying to settle permanently people who are able to make it to safety, but potentially to a third country. This is a thing that we have to not let let other people take up the space that should be devoted towards assisting Afghans, and also not let our dogshit leaders have the chance to let the issue go away, because this is a thing that these people are in dire need, and protecting them is the utmost priority. Like, fuck my feelings. That doesn't matter. What matters is that there is a possibility of people directing their energy and trying to get them to do the right thing or something approaching it. And, you know, if you don't, then you are effectively saying, well, like, it's not worth the argument or my energy to potentially save the lives of people who are facing an absolutely horrendous fate that no human being deserves.
Joe, do you have any final thoughts?
No.
Our lower enlisted ground pounder, shit's all fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, Nate pretty much said what I was thinking too. Is that, like, you know, I've got a lot of media requests and stuff that's like, oh, we want to talk about, like, how do veterans feel about losing this war, and I'm just like,
it sucks. What do you
you're
want?
A fucking monster, man. Like this, I'm sitting comfortably in a gamer chair in Honolulu, Hawaii. You want to know how I feel? Like, you should probably start talking to Afghan media. You're refugees. Like, talk to them. You fucking idiots. And the continued, like, silencing of like the Afghan experience in this conflict is exactly how we ended up here. You know, like, because if we looked at, like Nate was describing, like some of the worst suffering that you could possibly imagine, and you looked at that, like, I don't know, a human being at some point, you would realize, like, oh yeah, this is bad. Like, maybe there's more to this than Afghan is terrorists. But, like, no, we can't possibly learn about these people who we've been, you know, oppressing at various points worse than others over the last 2 fucking decades. We can't possibly speak to one of them. No. Like, I've even heard fucking Afghan journalists who work with American journalists, like, be told that they can't try to get them a visa because they were, like, a contractor. It's like, man, Like, I don't even know what to say to that. Like, you want to talk to me? Yeah, you want to talk to me and learn about what's going on in Kabul right now? Like, fuck off.
Right. I ain't seen Kabul since 2004, man. Like, I don't.
Right.
I don't know
I've been
shit.
to Kabul once for like 3 hours.
I'm glad we had a chance to, kind of clarify what priorities should be. I just hope that people listening to that bear that in mind, that if people think, what can I do? It's like, well, you probably live somewhere where the default setting for politics is to presume that they should be as cruel and hostile to refugees as possible. And like, that's the thing that we've got to combat, because there are a lot of people in desperate need that like we owe a debt to, because we have wronged them and our country has wronged them. And that should be where your energy goes if you want to listen to me. Anyway, that's all I got, man.
Thank you for listening. Joe, thanks for coming on. You should be, if you have not read Hooligans of Kandahar, you should absolutely go out and do that. An easy way to get it is to sign up for Joe's Patreon over at Lions Led by Donkeys, and he will send you an ebook of it. You're still doing that, right?
Yeah, if you want to get it the most expensive way possible, please become a patron of the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. I will not stop you from doing that.
You'll get even more nonsense from the rest of us, along with a pretty cool book. So do that. Check that out. Nate, Joe, thank you guys. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully things get better. Fucking who knows? They won't, but they will. I mean, such is progress, I guess. Right? So it fucking goes. Everybody, we'll talk to you next week.